What's up again, everybody? How's it going? How was your week? Mine was great. Here we are again, Square the Circle Music Channel. We're going to talk about music appreciation. That's right, squares and circles all day, all night long. Got a really fun pile of stuff to talk about tonight. Been sitting on this one for a little while, kind of wanted to pick and pull from all sorts of different nooks and crannies and include all sorts of fun little gems that I loved so dearly, wanted to display, show them to you guys. Nothing really extravagant or crazy or cool, but just stuff that I really love and adore, and I lump into a little category called experimental music. Some of it will fall into the genre of rock and roll. Some of it will be light years from that. Some of it will be a mishmash of in between. Who knows? Like I said, just a bunch of stuff I like to kind of like consider to be experimental music in some way, shape, or form. I'll get into the details of why I consider it to be experimental. But yeah, let's take a journey, shall we? Let's play with some stuff. So let's dive right into it, like I usually do. Always just winging it. Mage is always just winging it. So I bring this band up a lot, one of my favorite bands of all time. So of course I had to include them in here, coming from a place of experimental jazz roots and all sorts of things, and of course them being, you know, farmers of progressive music from, you know, decades past. You're all well aware of my love for the band King Crimson. This 1974 masterpiece titled Red, which I consider to be one of their greatest albums, and a lot of people would consider it to be one of the greatest rock albums of all time. And I consider it to be a very experimental album. My opinion is as such, and let me explain. These 3 years that we're talking about, 72, 73, and 1974, when this was released, included a big, fat, experimental group of sessions that these 3 gentlemen, Robert Fripp, John Wetton, Bill Bruford, just sat down and just started cranking out all kinds of just insane shit. And they just started kind of like, boom, album, boom, album. In my opinion, this one was the kind of like creme de la creme, the big working up to, you know, the sauce that was just all that experimental collaboration just finally ended up in this monumental masterpiece. And so I consider it to be an experimental album because it just is the birth, you know, or the kind of like aftermath, the afterbirth of just like all of this like insane stew pot that they were like, you know, not to say that Lark's Tongue and Aspic in 72 and Starless and Bible Black were half-baked by any way, in any way, shape, or form. That's not really what I'm alluding to. I just think that those were just kind of like, you know, just little bits and pieces of the recipe, you know, for what was to come, and that being this. I just think is an experimental masterpiece because they touch, you know, numerous different genres in here. Some of it's like straight up dark, like hard rock, kind of, you know, reminiscent of like what was going on in the early to mid 70s with like, you know, Deep Purple and just like crazy, you know, hard rock / progressive rock. But then, you know, out come the saxophones and the, you know, the flutes or whatever the fuck, you know, all kinds of great shit. And some just really insanely heady tracks on here that go into those really jammy experimental places. Of course, you all know I'm talking about the track Starless, which just happens to be probably one of the most epic, you know, rock and roll masterpiece songs of all time, in my opinion. But, you know, and everything that leads up to that on the second side, the song Providence, is just one experimental jazz, you know, drum, you know, just kind of crazy, you know, avant jazz piece. So yeah, and of course the first side of this album really, you know, is a lot more cohesive and glued together and really has a tale to tell. But still, experimental sounds, recording style, just, taking a rock song and putting that twist on it like these guys do. It just makes it something so special, so unique. And in my opinion, one of the greatest experimental rock albums of all time. So that's why I lump it in that category. Sure do love it. Sure is an amazing fucking album. So just wanted to share it with you guys. This happens to be that one of those re-releases that Steven Wilson did, a remaster by Steven Wilson on that Panegyric, I believe is what the label's called, that he kind of spearheaded and is like remastering all of these prog and kind of rock classics, not just prog but other rock classics. And so this is one of those, and remastered so wonderfully and so just masterfully, poetically. You can obviously, the guy adores and loves music, this music more than anything, and so you can tell he puts his soul into what he's remastering and reworking. So I highly recommend anyone that is a King Crimson fan or prog rock fan or just a rock music fan altogether, check out the Panegyric label that Steven Wilson created and is remastering some really classic fucking amazing albums. So check it out. Next in the pile, I came across this recently. I guess, this has been around for decades and decades, and I just stumbled upon it cruising around on the YouTubes or something like that, and wow, really just pleasantly surprised, and just had never heard anything about it. To be understood, there is just kind of like a no-name label out of, I believe, France. I think it's called Papier Mâché Records or something like that. But this release, a group called Deux Filles, which is French for two women, album called Silence and Wisdom. Begins really kind of like soft-spoken, reminiscent of soft piano stylings like you'd hear. This is like an early 80s album. I believe this was released in 82, and these ladies are French, and so just kind of the art scene that was going on in France in the early 80s. So you're getting some of those inspirations from artists like, I talk about Harold Budd a lot, that really kind of like off-tune piano, kind of smoky, kind of in the background, you're hearing this coming from like a dark room in the back of a theater somewhere, and that's how it's recorded as well. It's just kind of airy and really moody and atmospheric, but then you have all these pieces that just kind of are interjected where they're just kind of like right up in your face, and it's a very poetic moment. There's all kinds of interesting clips and reels of sound bites interjected with different folks from different cultures and different languages. You hear a lot of acoustic guitar stylings, a lot of just acoustic piano, and a lot of play with tape reels and just sound effects, and just, like I said, airy, atmospheric, darker kind of recording stylings. Really avant, really cool, very experimental. I love the shit out of it. It just kind of came out of left field. Never heard about it, never seen it before in my life, and just what a pleasant surprise. So anyone that really loves and appreciates experimental and instrumental music, I don't recall much lyrical vocalizations going on in this album, besides, like I said, just kind of like side recordings of just like other kind of like room sounds, and like folks talking, like there's older gentlemen and talking in Spanish, and it's like like probably recorded like in a cafe somewhere in Spain or something like that, just all kinds of really cool experimental atmospheric sounds. So but also some very clever, beautiful instrumentations, really composed quite beautifully. So yeah, 1982, I believe, Silence and Wisdom by a group of ladies called Deux Filles. Check it out. Really good. Another really obscure album I discovered somewhere deep on the internet one night or something like that, or maybe it popped up like on a Pandora station. I was listening to like Stephen Roach or something like that. That's what I kind of do in the the early mornings when I'm cruising around at work doing my thing, and I just like put in some kind of like, you know, ambient sounds and stuff like that, and this great stuff kind of pops up that I'm not familiar with. And this was one of those artists, a gentleman by the name of Robert Turman. This album's called Flux. Pretty obscure, pretty interesting. Anyone that really likes to just kind of put things on and just kind of like let the mood just kind of like swallow you whole, this album is fantastic for that. I've mentioned before, you know, the movie we love so much, High Fidelity, how he just says, you know, I just want to put something on that I can just ignore. You know, you're not going to be able to ignore it, but it's going to be there, and it's just going to, like I said, just kind of envelop you and just become part of the atmosphere. It's very, very simplistic, very low key, very minimalistic, you know, very lo-fi. Literally, you can just picture the guy just kind of like taking a reel-to-reel and plopping it on top of his piano and lighting up a cigarette and just like slowly plunking the keys. And it'll go on. Sometimes this is a double disc, and sometimes on one side it'll be going for a solid like 12-13 minutes, and you'll forget you even had a record on. It's just like, and all of a sudden it just like metamorphosizes into this really clever, melodic, really beautiful stuff. Like, it's so interesting. Like, the guy, it must be so meditative, and I think that's probably what maybe he's experimenting with, is kind of like, you know, musicality and composition writ by just a certain type of meditative state. And that's what this album does for me. It kind of almost puts me in that kind of pseudo meditative state. And you know, one of those things where you could just like find yourself, you know, just like staring at the wall for like 10 minutes straight, and all the ash on your cigarette has like grown and gone to nothing, and you know what I mean? One of those types of albums. Yeah, early in the 80s, super like independent release. 81, I believe. I think it was released and recorded all by him. I don't know anything about this gentleman, so I would entreat you folks to just get on the, you know, the webs and research this guy. And again, anyone that has, you know, a love for the things that are minimalist and you know, instrumental and anything piano centric, you're gonna dig the shit out of this. And I call it experimental just because I've just never really heard much like it. Even low-key piano music, you know, this still is like, it's different than all that. It's very cerebral and, like I said, kind of meditative. So yeah, get yourself a copy of this. Really intriguing shit. All right, some more interesting experimental music that I wanted to bring up this evening. These guys, they're waiting for a moment to bring this album out because it is one of my favorite albums of the last few years. I spin the shit out of this record. It is so great because it happens to be associated with one of those labels that I've talked about, and other numerous bands I've talked a lot about. This is a release from that fantastic label from Denmark that I love so dearly, El Paraiso Records. And this is a collaboration, a duo of two gentlemen from bands that I have mentioned a lot, Nicholas Sorensen and Jonas Munk. I believe, someone please correct me if this is wrong, but I think Jonas Munk, I know he's from the band Kazo Sui. I think he plays drums. I think he's the drummer from Kazo Sui. But Nicholas Sorensen is the guitar player from Papir, which is another band I've mentioned a whole bunch. They're both bands that are on the same record label, El Paraiso Records, out of Denmark, and this is a collaboration of them. It's compositions and improvisations for synthesizer and electric guitar. So it's exactly that. It's just synthesizer and electric guitar, and these, it's called Always Already Here. And this album is the fucking bee's knees. It is so great. Experimental, atmospheric, sometimes poppy and catchy, sometimes leaves you just totally in the stars, just floating in, you know, the ether. Dude, super, super fucking great. Very reminiscent of each of their side projects, not side projects, but their main bands. So you hear little bits and pieces of kind of like the jammy, super cool, jazzy stuff that Papyr is capable of. And then sometimes you also hear like these kind of like sludgier, kind of darker moments that Cause Sweet is capable of. And it's still, and also has like an air of like very like experimental, well not obviously, yes, it's experimental, but I mean like an air of improvisational stuff. Well, it doesn't even say, yes, it says compositions and improvisations for synthesizer and guitar. So yeah, it doesn't feel jammy. It doesn't like feel completely just kind of like aloof and just all over the place. Like they have a roadmap. It's obvious they have a roadmap, but it's very moments of very, you know, improvisational jazz style stuff. But yeah, really well put together, very cohesive, very, you know, accessible, highly, highly accessible, even for you folks that are like, I don't really like jazz, or I don't really like synthesizer music, or whatever. Like, dude, this album is really fantastic. There's moments in here where I'm like, man, am I listening to like the Police, you know? Am I listening to, it has like, you know, like 80s pop standard feel to it. The production and the recording quality, primo. Yeah, I'm just talking this album. I love this album, and it's just a piece of experimental mastery, in my opinion. So everyone, scope this out, check it out. You can buy it at your local record store for under $30. Super cool, beautiful presentation and art. I just love the presentation by this record label and how they do things like recycled, you know, paper jacket, and just like legit fucking company. This company's fucking great. So yeah, check this album out. Experimental genius. Very, very good stuff. Yeah, moving on down the line. Hope everyone's having a great week. I'm looking forward to my second COVID vaccination this weekend. Gonna get the second stab. Yeah, things are beautiful, warming up. The spring air is fantastic, isn't it? Been doing a lot of gardening. Got a little bit weird looking. Decided to take a few pounds off the face. Hope I'm not scaring anybody. Changes in the air. That's what spring is all about, right? Rejuvenation, change. Every year we do it. It's fantastic. Let's bring out some more experimental stuff here. For all of you prog nuts, of course, you all know much. I love progressive rock, and I bring out prog shit all the time. Here's one for you guys. Another one for you guys, I guess. Because that's what progressive music is. It's highly experimental, and it involves all those certain little facets, and one of them being of a very highly experimental quality. You need to be able to jump off that deep end, and you need to be able to do things. You need to be, you know, proficient on your fucking instruments, you know, so that you can dive off the high dive into deeper waters and really try new and interesting things that are going to be pushing the boundaries, and they're going to be taking rock and roll to new places. And that's what this album did, and that's what this dude did. I haven't really, you know, read really deep into this album, because I don't need to. I just put it on and I love it. I don't know exactly who all the players and all the instrumentations are, but this group or person or whatever is called Happy the Man. And this album's, what is it called again? Oh yeah, Crafty Hands. Dude, this album is wicked fucking cool. 1978, you know, so prog was getting like really, I mean, not kooky, but you know what I mean? Like different sounds and different ideas, and just getting, I mean, really getting like spaced out and wacky and crazy, just wackadoodle shit. But this stuff is very well designed, very well designed. from the moment you fucking drop the needle. There's just that like incredible play with rhythm, polyrhythmic, you know, complex, I mean, not hyper complex, but pretty complex stuff for like the layman, you know, and only people who are pretty proficient in jazz stylings and in, you know, percussion, people who are, you know, percussion players and drummers, they kind of get it. You get that kind of like 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3, you know, like the 3 and the 5 8 and then the 7 8, and they kind of pile and stack onto each other, and they all have that like long form kind of flow, like it's a hemiola. And there's just tons of that shit in here. You know, you're rolling along in your standard 6/8, and it's like, oh, there's a bar 5. You know, just kind of like it keeps your brain totally like it's an interface. Like I've mentioned before, like you're part of this, whether you want to admit it or not, or maybe you don't even know. You put this shit on, your brain and every bit and piece of your physical being and your metaphysical being is interacting with this insane shit that these guys are pulling off. It's like really heady, really cool, all instrumental kind of wackadoodle shit. I highly recommend it. Like, doesn't get more experimental for me. In the realm of like, you know, the mid to late 70s and what was going on in the world, people, you know, people wanted a career. People wanted to do stuff that was gonna be on the radio, that was gonna sell albums, that was gonna make t-shirts, that was gonna put food on the table. I get that. Whatever this guy's situation story was, certainly was not, that wasn't modus operandi for this dude. This shit is really wicked cool, experimental wizardry. So anyone that has, you know, a penchant toward the prog, or things that are just kind of like I said, not a challenge to listen to. It flows. It totally flows. Even for you folks that don't necessarily get the odd meter rhythm stuff, you know, and if you want to kind of bob your head to it, like, yeah, you can bob your head to it. You got to learn how to bob your head in a little bit different of a way. You got to learn that not everything flows in a constant, you know, square fashion. You know, things have jagged edges. So, yeah, check these guys out. Happy the Man, Crafty Hands. Really fucking cool. Okay. Gotta bring up the obligatory Yes record. Yes, you all know how much I love the band Yes. But in my opinion, they did, and they were capable and really put a lot of crazy, awesome, experimental stuff on the table. And they were doing things that their contemporaries at the time were not doing. Even, you know, the mastermind stuff of, you know, King Crimson and Gentle Giant and Genesis, and that, I do really feel that Yes was even more forward-thinking and experimental than those guys were at certain times, because they didn't use a lot of the little bag of tricks that jazz can give you, where you just have like all these great little things, technically speaking, that can make things really interesting rhythmically and what have you. You know, they were really taking symphonic music and the sounds given to them and using that to really like pull their inspiration from, and still managed to do things that were pushing boundaries and were highly experimental at the time. I mean, from the moment, you know, you put the cans on and all of a sudden you just hearing like weird little bird chirpings and waterfall sounds, and it's like, bands weren't doing that in 1972, 1973, and these guys were. I feel that this album, Close to the Edge, 1972 by Yes, was really, was it 73? I don't know. It was probably closer to 72. This, in my mind and in my opinion, was really their first foray into the truly experimental regions of what progressive music was doing. Yeah, the stuff before this, you know, Fragile and what it was, super progressive, and you know, they were pushing it. But then this was they were close to the edge, and then they were just like, wee, and they went off into the, you know, into the soup and just started making some crazy. They were like, we don't give a fuck. We're just gonna like, yeah, we're gonna start this album off with like, you know, at least about 30 or 40 seconds of like, you know, nature sounds, and then we're just gonna go into this like swirling and just like fucking Steve Howe's punching in all kinds of like, there's like 3 guitar parts going on at the same time. This guitar part over here is just like fucking just noodling into nothingness, and then the other guitar part in this area is just kind of just going all over the place and fucking, you know, I mean, Bill Bruford's not really doing anything. He's just kind of like screwing around, but like, you know, Wakeman on the keyboards just all over the place, and they're just like doing all kinds of this fucking chaos. It's fucking like, you know, a solid 3 minutes of chaos before they even bring in any type of real melody or any type of concept or idea into the song. And like the album just keeps going like that. Well, the song Close to the Edge just keeps going like that. Just, yeah, it's experimental, super weird, amazing shit. And the rest of the album too, you know, experimenting with just like cutting songs into like different parts. You know, you have this song and this is part A, part B, part C, and then they all kind of play out like this weird kind of like drama. I don't know. I think this album is experimental as fuck, and it always has been in my mind. And this was like, again, like I said, kind of the launch pad for them to like go right ahead. You nail it with this one, see what else we can do, you know. And then immediately thereafter in '74 you have Relayer, and then, you know, it's just like even more fucking crazy. So yeah, I think this album is incredibly experimental and awesome. Yeah, deserves a lot of praise, obviously. Has gotten lots of praise over the decades. So that's that. I hope you're all enjoying this list of 10 of my favorite experimental albums. Here's a little bit more of a modern day experimental masterpiece. Again, a band that I hold dear in my heart. I really love them. I'm so glad that they exist. I'm glad that they're playing rock and roll. They're doing things for rock and roll I feel are really important, and they're keeping it moving forward, keeping it interesting, keeping it artistic, keeping it legit, keeping it real. Talking about the band, Elder, I've talked about them a lot. This was a fun little EP they released a couple years ago called the Gold and Silver Sessions. An alchemical, experimental, creative masterpiece, an in-betweener. An in-between EP where they had been going through some, I don't know what the personal jams may have been, but they decided to part with the drummer that they had been with for quite some time. And they picked up a new drummer. They made a move to Europe. They had been based out of Massachusetts, I believe, in their formative years, had released a couple albums, and then for however or whatever, I don't know how they pulled it off, they managed to move to Deutschland. And because maybe they have, you know, some sort of living, working visa, they managed, like maybe one of the guys went to school there, who knows. They managed to set up shop in Germany, and more power to them. It's fucking awesome. So now they're based out of Germany. They picked up a drummer, a German, I think, maybe. But anyway, their lead singer, songwriter, guitar player, Nick DeSalvo, while they were having kind of like maybe taking a break, they got some really big notoriety and achieved some very serious success with Reflections of a Floating World, 2017, I believe, and maybe decided to just like take a little bit of a break and enjoy some success and do whatever they wanted to do. Well, this was kind of like some sessions that he sat down with another group. I think they're from somewhere in Europe. I'm not sure exactly where, but a band called, I think they're called Gold and Silver. Really fucking cool band. I had one of their LPs for a while. It was called Azurite Malachite, by a band called Gold and Silver. Yeah, kind of dorky, but really cool. And so they sat down and had some sessions together, and this was the result of that. It's all instrumental. You can hear a lot of, you know, the concepts and ideas and things that they were kind of hashing out, or Nick DeSalvo was hashing out in his head, ideas for their smash hit in 2020, Omens. So you kind of hear like the like I said, the alchemical stew that was going on while he was trying to like create all that great stuff. But you have a bunch of really cool, smoky, jammy, progressive metal stuff on here that just kind of like is a great concoction of just you know, ideas and experimental thought process, you know, which is I fucking love. Like what better way to like, you know, jam around the studio, create a bunch of cool stuff, bunch of ideas, fuck, put it on EP, make a few bucks from it, you know, like that's great. The artistic process, which I'm not really familiar with, which I wish I could have been a part of in my lifetime. I wanted to be a, you know, a studio musician, and I wanted to make albums with people. You know, it just never really happened. But I love that shit. I love it when artists are like experimental and creative, and they just like sit together with other musicians and be like, dude, we're not going to be in a band, but let's just like, let's feed each other. Let's feed each other. You feed my brain, I'll feed your brain. And we'll just like, fuck, may as well hit record, you know, and then we'll sell a couple records and make a few bucks and put it on a t-shirt, whatever. I love that shit. It's great. These guys are top notch. Class act. Check this shit out. Super cool experimental EP that came out, I believe, just, you know, right before Omens did, so in 2019. It's called the Gold and Silver Sessions. Really, really cool. It's just 2 songs, one on the A, one on the B. Or excuse me, 2 songs on the A side, one on the B side. You know, it's a half an hour of music. Well worth it. Well worth the 20 or 30 bucks you gotta pay for it. It's really, really cool. So check it out. Moving right along, gonna bring out a classic, bring an oldie but a goodie. You know how I roll. This one, I'll never forget the first time I heard this. Somebody, oh yeah, you like jazz music? You like kind of avant, kind of experimental, weird, kind of jazzy stuff? Yeah, you never heard this album, huh? Weird. I was probably like way too old. I should have heard this when I was younger. I was, I was a little bit of a weird personal story. I was like working with this gal, and we kind of ended up kind of hooking up. But she was 10 years my senior. And so, not quite. She was 9. She was 9 years older than me. So when I was like, you know, in my mid-20s, she was like in her early to mid-30s. Anyway, something I shouldn't have been involving myself with, but she had great fucking taste in music. And so we, you know, it's really great when you meet somebody who you have a romantic relationship with too, but you can share your stuff with that person. And we're almost 10 years apart, so we have a completely different idea of what's good, what's not, what's great. You know what I mean? And so she was like really kind of opening my head to like all this really great shit that I already had an affinity toward, because she was also really into jazz, and she was really into, you know, progressive, and she was into hard rock and punk and just all kinds of awesome shit. And so she opened my brain to this, and I, you know, being 24 years old and never hearing this album, she was blown away. I can't believe you've never heard this album, you know? And the moment she put this on, you know, I couldn't believe it. I was like, what the fuck am I hearing? Holy shit. Hot Rats by Frank Zappa. It doesn't get any more just fucking wacky, crazy, experimental jazz, rock, just oddball, cool shit. All this stuff that he was doing, and that Captain Beefheart was involved with this too, and just like all the players and musicianship, and just like, I mean, I don't really need to go off about this to you folks, do I? I mean, everyone knows, you know, this is just a monumental masterpiece of an album. I just had to bring it out because it truly is one of the more experimental albums I've ever come across in my days. I mean, there's some really avant, really fucking crazy shit out there. I understand that, but this is just still a solid piece of, you know, jazz musicianship, artistry, rock and roll history. You know, everyone can enjoy this album. Everybody. Mr. Green Jeans, and just like just Peaches and Regalia, of course, to open it up. But then as you're going, like the gumbo variations, It Must Be a Camel. I mean, come on. Willie the Pimp. I think that's the one that Beefheart's on, right? Yeah. What a fucking cool album. So yeah, any of you crazy kids that's never really given this a chance, dude, get out and get it. To get it on LP, kind of difficult. You got to pay a little bit of money, but it's worth it. So check out Zappa's Hot Rats, 1969. Whew, music didn't sound like, nothing sounded like this did in 1969. Jeepers Creepers. Wild shit. Even to today's standards, 50 years later, it's fucking wild shit. It's cool. It's really cool. All right, we're coming to a close here. This one, I put it on the list because it's not anything like hyper exceptional, experimental, it's not really an oddball. It's just compared to the rest of the stuff that he had done in his career up until this point, was so tame and so not by the book, but just so kind of just minimalist and just really low key, very simplistic, all on like kind of the Rhodes keyboard, and just kind of tinkle tunes, really happy, just like back porch wind chimes, tinkle tunes. And then he came out with this one, 1986. After a few other releases, one of his early releases is probably one of my favorite albums of all time. It's up there. It's got to be up on my top 20 list for sure of my favorite albums of all time. Of course, I'm talking about Hiroshi Yoshimura. And this is his album called Green. The album I was just mentioning is on my greatest albums of all time. It's called Music for 9 Postcards. This was a couple years later after that, and so this one I classify as being an experimental album because like I said, he was going far off of his beaten path and what he was used to and what he was doing and what he was, comfortable with. When you put this on, you feel that he's going outside his comfort zone and that he's doing something that he feels was truly experimental compared to what he was used to and compared to what his, to what his kind of like, the garden that he was used to tending. This was a whole new area for him. Lots of new kind of like, tape reel and synth sounds and loops, loop stations and arpeggiators, and it was getting really heavy synthesizer oriented. Probably because he was getting inspired by a lot of his contemporaries of Japan. A lot of those guys were just getting really heady and really wild with the sounds they were making and the ideas and the concepts. And whereas, like I said, in the prior years, 1981, 1982, the Air album and Music for 9 Postcards and stuff is just so subtle and low key, which I love. It's like one of my favorite albums, like I said, of all time. Just that really subtle Rhodes piano. Just melts you all day. This has, some real, a lot more kind of, clever moments that really make you think, moments that really make you kind of like, you have to kind of play a part in this. Yeah, it's really fantastic. Anyone that has never really given this guy a shot, you really gotta give this guy a shot. Ambient mastery. Synthesizer, piano, master genius, Hiroshi Yoshimura. So yeah, 1986 is Green. Falls under that category for me as being an experimental album. I wouldn't say he's an experimental artist. I just think this is one of his more kind of like branching out albums, and I really respect and love it. And I think everyone should have it in their collection. Beautiful album art, beautiful presentation. This is a reissue from a couple years ago. The original album art has some interesting, like a mandala on it or something like that. So you'll see different copies out there. That one, will cost you $300. This one will cost you $29.95. So it definitely sounds beautiful. It's from the original master tapes from his, estate, whoever bought up the rights from his original estate, the master tapes. So the sound quality is absolutely phenomenal. So you'll feel like you're in the room with him. Pretty cool. Check it out. Last, but certainly not least, thanks again for joining me. If you haven't thought about it yet or you haven't done it before, please like my videos. Please subscribe. Tell your friends. Share it with other people. All of you jokers who are, tourists, they just come by to watch me make an ass out of myself and don't bother liking or subscribing to my videos. I'm gonna hunt you down. I'm gonna figure out who you are. I'm gonna make you subscribe. Anyway, last but certainly not least, I'm bringing up another one of them artists, one of them El Paraiso artists, and this is the band that I was just mentioning. The aforementioned band I love so dearly, Caso Sui. Everybody go out and get some Caso Sui. Holy shit, they're fucking great. Danish, jazz, stoner rock. I mean, you could classify this shit at least in 3 or 4 different genres / subgenres. Any way you slice it, they're fucking great. They're basically stoner rock mixed with jazz. Sometimes I put this on and I'm like, dude, this album is metal as fuck. It is at times so doomy and sludgy, stonery. But because you don't have that really like overwhelming, super crunchy, loud ass electric guitar, and the very low, deep, super crunch bass and stuff, their instruments are of a much higher timbre, and the way the production is, it's not a like deep in the dick and balls type of fucking metal type music. It still has that stoner sludge doomish feel though, like hard to put your finger on. You gotta put it on, you gotta spin this shit and sit back and listen for a split second and just like, think, just be a part of where it takes you. And it takes you to like some darker places. It's really cool. But at the same time, like I said, it's that super cool psychedelic stoner jazz. So, I think I like to call these guys, it's like, imagine like the Grateful Dead and Sabbath, kind of had this weird kind of love stoner baby. Yeah, it's really fucking great. Really great psychedelic stoner jazz. I'm not gonna even go any further. Like, they don't even have a track listing on here. Like, all these tracks just kind of like melt together. Because they all they sort of have their own individualistic quality, but more or less this thing, it just plays out like kind of one long ass epic journey. Yeah, and they're notorious for that. A lot of their albums that they put out are live session albums that are, live at Freak Valley, and just like all these really cool sessions of them playing these really long, epic stoner style jams that go on for a fucking hour, and you're like, dude, I just listened to one song for an hour. And it's like, you kinda did. They're one of those bands. Super fucking cool. So yeah, everybody find a way, get out there, get yourself some Kazao. Kazao? It's hard to pronounce. I think it's Caso Sui. Been following these guys for years now, and I can't get enough. Same with that group Papir from the same label. Those Danes, man, those Danish fuckers. So much good music coming out of that part of the world. Anyway, I'll go ahead and sign off. I love each and every single one of you assholes. Thanks for coming by and tuning into my fucking nutty, crazy hour where I just ramble about music. But this has been 10 experimental albums that I really, really love dearly. And I think you all should go out there and buy them as well. Support the artists, support your local record store, support your mom and dad, all that great stuff. I love you guys. Peace be with you.